Thank you for checking out the latest edition of the Paltrocast with Darren Paltrowitz. This episode features interviews with 3 different people in the entertainment world who I've been a big fan of for a long time, and those people are Judas Priest singer Rob Halford, director, actor, writer, etc. David Arquette, and Chris Demakes from the band Less Than Jake. First up is my interview with Rob Halford, the legendary singer of the band Judas Priest. If you're a longtime listener of the Paltrocast, you may recall that Rob was on an episode about a year and a half ago, but this is a new interview that I did with Rob. He was promoting his then upcoming book called Confess the Autobiography, and I had the pleasure of talking with him about 10 or so minutes during a press junket. We spoke a bit about the book, and it's really a great book. It tells a lot about Rob Halford that you probably didn't know, because as the book kind of alludes to that with the title, he had to hide a lot of who he really is, especially at the peak of his fame. So he goes into that a little bit in the interview. We also talk about some fun stuff. He lives in Arizona, where he's been for a couple of decades now. I think you're going to like this one. Rob, good evening. How's it going there today?
Hello, Darren. Everything's great, my friend. Yes. Whereabouts are you? What location are you at? Are you in the US?
Yes, Long Island, New York, which you have played many times.
Strong Island, yes. Love that part of America. It's nice to talk with you. We've only got about 15 minutes, so shall we dive in?
We shall dive in. So I had the pleasure of reading your book over the last few days, and the prologue of it, which, pardon my English, screaming my tits off forever, is wonderful. And you are actually talking about the year 2020 in there. Was it the plan all along to be covering 2020, or was that added later on?
You know, Ian Dittins, has just been amazing to make this book happen with. We just kept an open calendar on everything right up until the world ended, you know, as we went into 2020. But, the great thing about this book was the openness and the honesty and just the constant search for covering as much time as we could, as I could remember, which it turned out to be quite decent. But also, you know, looking ahead. It's all that's part of who I am, Darren. You know, I've always been a very optimistic person, which I think I also mentioned in the book.
Right, and it comes across very quickly in the book that you are very normal. You talk about that in the prologue, where you mentioned liking to watch Netflix and play the penny slots and go on long walks and all that.
Yeah.
Did you become normal as you got older, or were you actually this normal in your early 20s?
I think I've always been that way. And again, I reference who I am as to where I'm from. You know, Walsall in the West Midlands is a very down-to-earth, blue-collar part of the UK. And you don't get an opportunity to put yourself on a pedestal. Not that I ever wanted to, anyway. But you know, all of the glamour, the so-called rock and roll glamour, which for some exists, and in some areas of music definitely exists. It was never an attraction for me, Darren. It was all about the guts of my life, which has been heavy metal music.
It cracks me up how many times you reference Spinal Tap in the book when you refer to Nostradamus as Jazz Odyssey, that kind of equivalent from the Priest catalog. I've read stories about how Aerosmith, when they saw Spinal Tap in the movie theater, they thought it was a real movie. They were so high and they were actually pissed off. And Motorhead helped inspire the movie. But did you find it funny when you originally saw it in the 80s?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that little cool story about Glenn and I going to see the movie while we were on tour. We had a dive in San Diego, and we snuck into a matinee and saw it, and we roared. We thought, this is, what is it? Art imitates life imitates art. It was a purest example of that. And in that respect, as we've always said within Priest, we take our music deadly seriously, but we have a lot of fun doing it. And the references in Spinal Tap definitely had some Priest elements from the beginning to the end of that flick.
Well, you were part of, with members of Spinal Tap, one of my favorite singles of all time, which is the Stars song that you did with Hearing Aid. And in my opinion, you have the best verse on that song. But when you were in the room with the Spinal Tap guys, was it good vibes of the fact that they were there, or did everyone kind of think that they were making fun of them?
You know, as I can recall, as best as I can recall, everyone that did that wonderful record with Ronnie had seen the movie. So we were all, I think we were all doing the shock and awe when some of the Spinal Tap guys came into the movie. We are not worthy, you know. And but it really is genius from an acting point of view. The performances that the guys gave were totally spot on, and they stayed in character. They stayed in character in the studio while I was there, and they never dropped out of character once, which made it even more funny. And it was just another brilliant memory for that great event that Ronnie created.
Yeah, your history really is full of these amazing stories and memories and connections that you made. One of them, which I don't recall reading about in the book, was you singing backup on the Queens of the Stone Age album. Was that a memorable thing, or is that you just did one or two takes and you got out of the room?
That was just a very spontaneous bit of rock and roll fun, yeah. I'm pretty sure I was in Sound City in Los Angeles making the Halford record. And Josh came by and just said hi, and you know how much a kind of Priest he was, and so on and so forth. And I knew of Queens of the Stone Age already, being a fan of their music. So it was just a quick, hey, you know, we're doing this track, and would you consider coming in and laying some vocals down? And I think I was in and out in 15 minutes, you know. But that's the kind of friendship that a lot of musicians have. Essentially, we're all living the same life, and no matter what kind of music you do, there are certain parts of being a musician that replicate in your life, no matter who or where you're from. And there's this great support system, you know. So it was, it was a very spontaneous bit of rock and roll.
And there's a great story in the book, without giving too much away, about you meeting the Queen and striking up a friendship with Scylla. Did you see her again after that incident?
I didn't know. I sent her some flowers. I sent her a huge bouquet of flowers a couple of days later. And I believe I also sent her, this didn't go in the book because it's, you know, the great thing about Ian is that we'll talk and talk and talk, and then something will come along later, like this you're asking me, Darren, it could trigger something. I sent her a song. I'm trying to remember now what song it was. I'm pretty certain it might have been a Priest ballad that I included in the note, and said, Scylla, here's a CD of a song. We would love to hear your rendition on it. But we didn't get back. But shortly after that, of course, she had that tragic accident. So she was an icon and still is a legend, the national treasure from the UK. Her voice was unmatched, and it had so much style and flair and distinctive qualities about it. She was a one of a kind, was Scylla.
Yeah, your book is just full of great stories of you bumping into fellow geniuses like Jimmy Page and her, Johnny Depp, Lady Gaga, etc. And the common theme of most of these run-ins is that people talk about their appreciation and admiration of you and your career. And of course, if you aren't a metalhead, if you aren't somebody that likes hard rock, you might stupidly peg Judas Priest as being an 80s band, not realizing that the roots of the band go back to the 60s, and the band is still doing great these days. I'm curious when you started to realize that you were an influential artist.
You know, these kinds of notifications, the Apple WhatsApp notification things, they start to pop up out of the blue, and references are made towards you and about you that you're generally not prepared for, you know. And the when they do happen, it's a lovely feeling, really, because you're not searching for that, you're not expecting it. I think more than anything, it's an affirmation of what you've made with your music in a band like Priest for 50 years this year. So it's just a very generous kind of presentation to you that makes you feel good, you know. And yeah, you know, when you're on The Simpsons, I suppose that means you're embedded in American culture, just talking about America for a moment. But worldwide, Priest have been flying the flag for British heavy metal for 50 years. No matter where we go, there's a connection to the band and our music in the world.
Right. Well, the last time I interviewed you, you talked about how you still thought that one day you might do a blues album. Is that something you're still thinking about?
You know it is, and I'll give you an exclusive. It's already begun. I'm going to work on this blues. I'm working on this blues album again with my brother and my nephew and friends that worked with me together on the Celestial album. It's such a great time, and they're so talented. And that blues feeling has never left me. It's just part of rock and roll. So it's begun. We're slowly putting bits and pieces together. There's no timeline on it. But we're kicking the tires, and I've already got snippets of ideas here on my iPhone, and they sound great.
Wow, you might be the only person to do a blues album and work with Stock, Aikman, and Waterman, so that might be a first there.
You know, keeping an open mind in music is really important. As we've said many times in Priest, we're well aware of what goes on around us in metal and outside of metal. And there are so many opportunities for inspiration that it's foolish to put the blinkers on and just stay focused in one dimension. At least it is for Priest. That's why, as a band, we've always been so diverse with our music. As I've said to you before, Darren, 1 minute we can be the Painkiller, and the next minute we can be the Turbo Lover. So that moment that we had with Stock, Aitken and Waterman, it came out of that open-mindedness that we have.
3 more quick questions, and then you're a free man. And the first one is, you talk about early in the book about the experience of you and the rest of the Halford family going to a professional wrestling live event and how your mom kind of caused a scene.
Yeah.
Was there ever for you a second live professional wrestling event?
No, but I tell you what's really funny. You know, there's an app going on around now called Reface app. Somebody sent me one of Richie Faulkner going into the ring on the face of John Cena, I think it was. So I'm expecting. Actually, somebody sent me a Wonder Woman today, which is spot on. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, Darren. It's called Reface app, where you can put your face on anybody. So there was that humorous thing that just happened with Richie. As far as wrestling goes, of course, I have a good friend, Fozzie from the Fozzie band, helped me out.
Chris Jericho, yeah.
Chris, yes, known Chris for years, wonderful guy, and it's a great entertainment and sport, wrestling. I've always fancied myself as the guy that's calling out the opponents. What was that? There used to be a really famous guy that was in the corner of one of the big stars that would always yelling at the other wrestlers and throwing things at them and that kind of stuff. I've always kind of fancied myself as being one of those guys who's my bullwhip, whipping the opponents. So who knows? There's plenty of time left for that.
Paltrocast. Next up is my interview with David Arquette. At the top of the episode, I think I called him a director, writer, actor, producer, etc. He has many titles because he's always been steadily working. And when we spoke, he was promoting a new movie called Spree, which is kind of an action thriller, even though it has a lot of comics in it. But we also spoke about a new documentary that he's the star of called You Can't Kill David Arquette. Not everybody realizes that David Arquette was a world champion within the field of professional wrestling in the late 1990s. Kind of a controversial thing to wrestling fans who are purists. And this documentary focuses on him making peace with all that. And actually getting back into wrestling. It's unbelievable the shape that he got into. It's unbelievable the sacrifices that he was making to do all of that. If I were famous like David Arquette and all that, I don't think I'd have it in me to want to put work and family on hold to delve into the things that he did within this documentary. But he's a special guy, and it was really a pleasure to speak with him. Got him to open up a little bit about Andy Kaufman within this chat. Think you're going to like this one as well. David,
Hey,
how's
Darren.
it going there today?
It's going well. Thank you. How are you doing?
Excellent. Thank you very much. And I first want to ask you about Spree. When was it actually made? Because sometimes you hear that movies were made 3 years ago, and then other times that things were in post-production, a month before it actually came out.
Yeah. When we were at Sundance last winter, it got, so I think it was around last summer we shot this.
And it's very impressive how many people in the film are from comedic backgrounds, yourself included. Do you know if they intentionally cast comedians for this kind of movie?
I knew that Eugene wanted to have a comedic element. All of his previous films were really funny, and I think he looks at the world in a very comedic way. It was interesting, the kind of humor we explored in it. There's a lot of, I said in my initial meeting with him, he was talking about cringe videos. I was like, what are those? And he said, well, it's somebody who's incredibly cringy and they're doing stuff that just makes you uncomfortable. I was like, that's so funny because I feel like my life's been a bit of a cringe factory. And he's like, well, turn that up when we're shooting our stuff because it's part of the film. It's this sort of awkward aspect of the human condition, and then amplified by this social media and desire to be liked, just adds to this whole tapestry.
Well, growing up as a fan of Howard Stern and WCW, you always kind of hit on all the cylinders as to what I was interested in and all that. And you also have You Cannot Kill David Arquette coming out soon. And our mutual friend Diamond Dallas Page is, of course, instrumental in all that. Did you know outright that you were going to be doing a documentary?
The documentary idea had floated around for a while. I hated being the butt of all the jokes. They never let me do anything in the ring when I was wrestling because they thought I was going to get hurt or I didn't know what I was doing. So getting an opportunity to properly train, to learn how to wrestle was really great. Peter Avalon, a professional wrestler, really helped me train. And doing DDPY really helped me start losing weight and prepare to get in the ring and not hurt myself. He's got so many great, he's just a mentor of mine. He's been really supportive. I can't praise Diamond Dallas Page enough.
Right. I personally think that your wrestling history, even before the documentary, holds up because I look at it all from the Andy Kaufman perspective, where it was a celebrity coming in with a different perspective to the whole thing. Was Andy Kaufman an influence with your run with WCW at all?
I always loved Andy Kaufman and what he did and how much he loved wrestling. I think that's what sort of was similar about us. I thought more people would get that angle of it a little more and have fun with it. But they didn't. I mean, there's a couple of wink and nods in the wrestling documentary to Andy Kaufman. I have Gary the King Lawler pile drive me after I said I'm from Hollywood or I'll sue you. So, yeah, it was really fun to sort of go down that road and become a heel for a second until a pile driver set me straight on how to behave. But once I did that, I turned heel and I said all this stuff, and then Jerry comes out and he gives me a pile driver. And then as I'm leaving the ring, I was saying to him, "You never believed in me." I was yelling at the audience. And then I'm walking off the out of the ring, and I get down and I'm walking go backstage, and there's a little kid and he's crying, and he's probably 8 years old. He's like, "I believed in you. I believed in you." I had a moment where I couldn't like look at him, and I was like, I couldn't say I'm sorry because I'm still in my heel place, and I'm not enough of a heel that I'd say, "Sorry, kid." There's no Santa Claus either. But it was a funny moment. I mean, there's really so many interesting exchanges with wrestling fans when you get out there and really become a part of it.
I can only imagine. And it's also amazing to me that right now you're promoting Spree in the documentary, and people who look at your IMDb page will know that Scream 5 is sort of in pre-production. So you're really juggling a mix of studios, indies, reality, and all that. Is that invigorating for you, or is that challenging to know that it's Spree at one moment, the documentary at the next?
Well, as a actor in this business for 30 years, you learn pretty quickly if you don't have other projects going on, you're going to go pretty crazy because there's a lot of sitting around. There's a lot of working on projects that end up going nowhere. So it's we also do projects to entertain people. We want to make films that connect with an audience, that people find and want to see and develops a buzz. So when you do get projects like this that are getting a really great response, that are picked up by great film festivals and are represented by really great companies, you want to support them. You want to get the word out. You want people to enjoy them because that's really ultimately what we're always trying to do. I'm seldom trying to boost my ego or do something that makes me look tough or I always try to approach it from script, the characters, my role within the story, and then how can we make the best film possible.
And as you mentioned before, DDPY absolutely helped your recovery and get you into shape and all that. Is that still something that you do a couple times a week?
I do it upon occasion. I'm not sure if it's weekly, but definitely some of the stretching techniques for sure.
Cool. Now, so since some of this article is going up on the Jewish Journal, do you mind a quick Jewish question or two?
Yeah, of course.
Were you bar mitzvahed? That part I couldn't find out on the internet.
Yeah, I was bar mitzvahed at the Wailing Wall when I was 40 years old.
Wow, 40 years old. When you do a service like that, do they give you the English character Hebrew, or do you just have to repeat what you hear, anything like that?
I repeated what I heard. I mean, I hope it's not bad to say, but getting a bar mitzvah at the Wailing Wall is a lot like getting married in Las Vegas. They make it very easy for you. You go through all the steps, but it's a lot quicker of a process. You meet with the rabbi a few times. He reads the Torah, and you repeat after him, and you celebrate. I mean, the fact that it's at the Wailing Wall alone is really remarkable, and I just love visiting Israel.
Well, two quick questions, and then you're free. And the first one is, Dwayne Johnson, a fellow thespian of yours, likes to say that anytime that somebody's been a champion in wrestling, that he calls them champ whenever he encounters them. Does anyone call you champ in your everyday existence?
A lot of wrestling fans actually do call me champ, which is nice. But I call a lot of people champ. My personal opinion is that we're all the champion of our own world. That's one thing that always upset me. It's like, what, I'm not good enough to be a champion? I think it's like Muhammad Ali said, I am the greatest. And I think he was speaking to all of us, for all of us to say, I am the greatest. because you're the greatest in your world and I'm the greatest in mine. And that's sort of my philosophy in life. It helps me to, believe it or not, it helps me to humble myself and understand that, you know, I might be the most important person in my world, but you're the most important person in yours. So it gives you an ability to respect the other person and honor them, and without sort of seeing yourself as better than anyone else.
Hearing you say that means you've been spending a lot of time with DDP.
Yeah, exactly. DDP's always been such a huge inspiration. He's such a positive mentor, and just the way he conducts himself, the way he, you know, feeds his body. He's like one of the healthiest people I've ever met.
Absolutely. So in closing, David, besides seeing your new movies, any last words for the kids?
Oh, don't be hard on yourself. Love yourself. That's what my main takeaway from the wrestling documentary was. After the death match, my wife was really upset with me. She's like, I feel like you just want to die. And I was like, well, I don't want to die. But it did make me look at how I'd been so self-destructive and abusive to myself. And that took a lot of work with therapists and with a lot of self-help books, a lot of just personal sort of growth to come to the understanding of what's important in life, you know, where to spend your energy and time, how to be an honest, caring person without being beating myself up all the time.
Wow. Okay. Well, really looking forward to seeing the full-length documentary. Thank you so much for your time, and keep up the great work you're doing.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Dan.
Paltrocast.
Last, but definitely not least, is my interview with Chris Demakes of the band Less Than Jake. One of my favorite interviews that I've done this year, over the past few years in general. He's such a great guy. And there's so much more to him than Less Than Jake. For example, earlier this year, Chris started up a podcast called Chris Demakes A Podcast. Yes, that is a pun. He is a funny guy. You would know that if you listen to Less Than Jake, of course. But this podcast isn't about him. It's about great songwriters writing great songs, how they came up with those songs, the inspiration, the process, etc. The first episode that I heard that really grabbed me was one he did with Rick Nielsen from Cheap Trick, who I've had on this podcast. He got Rick to talk about the song Surrender by Cheap Trick, still a huge song to this day. And I never knew so much of the stuff that Rick said during the interview about what the song meant and the process and the level of fame of Cheap Trick at the time. He also has great episodes with Matt Skiba, who is from the Alkaline Trio but has been in Blink-182 for the past couple of years. There's an upcoming episode, well, it'll be out by the time this episode is out, with Laura Jane Grace. Chris, again, was such a pleasure to speak with. And this represents, I think, the first 25 minutes or so of our conversation. The next 25 minutes or so are on my other podcast, the DLRcast, because I got Chris to talk about Van Halen and David Lee Roth and his hard rock influences. Not everybody realizes that people from the punk or ska genres don't just listen to punk and ska. The influence came from elsewhere. So we spoke about that in depth, and Chris might know more about David Lee Roth than I do. Video of this chat, or at least a lot of this chat, is also on YouTube if you want to see some of the visual stuff that he was saying or that I was referring to. I could talk to that guy for another 2 or 3 hours, so we'll see again if that happens in the near future. Thanks for listening. Hey, Chris, you can hear me okay?
I can. How you doing?
Thumbs up. Right on time, man. I mean, not that I expect anything less from you.
If there's one thing I am, is punctual. My grandfather always said, if you're on time, you're late. If you're early, you're on time.
Putting the punk in punctual. Good day so far otherwise?
Great day.
Cool. I am so glad we connected, because I knew about you and your music, of course, you know, ska kid from Long Island. You know who Chris and Less Than Jake are. But then when I found out about your podcast, I have to give you a huge compliment. Your interview with Rick Nielsen is 20 times better than either of my attempts at interviewing him. How'd you do that so well?
You know, I've met him a couple times, and I kind of knew what I was getting into. He's very sarcastic, and so am I. But I try to keep my show a little different than a lot of people have commented. You know, you seem so different than you are on stage. It's like, well, yeah, you know, I didn't want to blur the lines with this. I made this in stark contrast to my stage persona, because I didn't want to, you know, the podcast to be about, you know, dick jokes and stupid shit that we do live, you know, like, because I could be 85 years old and that stuff's always going to be funny to me, you know. But this was, you know, I was thinking ahead of wanting to take the show, you know, to a place where families could, you know, drive to baseball games on Saturday and listen to it in the car. And, you know, it could be I don't want to say a family thing, but I just wanted it to be a little above boards. So.
Yeah, you went in super prepared, because the first time I interviewed Rick, it was for Guitar World. I put it up on the website, and I'd say something along the lines of, so I heard a rumor that you're making a Christmas album. Is that true? And he'd go, not true. And he'd go, well, because we already made it. And I'm like, oh, I should have waited for the pause. You knew to wait for the pause.
Kind of, yeah, you know, I don't know. It was he kind of did his thing, but I also have to hand it to my producer, Chris Fafalios. Chris does a good job at editing certain things out. So we do.
Oh, okay.
We do some cleanups. Not to say we did much. You know, we don't do anything crazy, but a lot of the ahs and the stops, and we try to make the show flow a little bit. You know, because you never know. Some people aren't cut out for doing this. You know.
Yeah, I love the roster, the rundown of people you've had on the show already. Most people, when they start a podcast, they have to call in a couple favors because, well, hey, if you pitch it to a publicist, they'll go, okay, cool. How many listeners do you have? Oh, nobody? Who's been on the show before? Nobody. So it's not out yet. Oh, yeah, we'll get back to you. In your case, when you're getting, you know, not only a bandmate, but members of the Alkaline Trio and all that kind of stuff, you had a good leg up. But you seem like a real natural for talking songcraft with people.
Well, you know, I've been in the business for 30 years, and
yeah,
you know, I went to school for telecommunications, and I always to college. I always thought that I was going to go into radio, and I've certainly done enough interviews over the years, and I've done enough shitty interviews over the years. So. That's really it. It's not the good ones you never remember. You just remember the ones that are like, oh God, where'd your band name come from? Oh, dude, you ever heard of
your influences, Chris?
Yeah, well, you know, and for me, it's like there was two things with the podcast that I didn't want to do. I didn't want it to be an interview. I don't care about your band politics. I don't care about your third drummer that sued you. I don't care about any of that shit, because it doesn't matter to me, and it doesn't interest me. What interests me is the song that either the artist, the guest, or myself chooses, which I did one yesterday. I was allowed to choose the song, which was great. And sometimes I'll suggest something, but ultimately I leave it up to the guest. And you know, I want to know everything about the song from the beginning idea to everything. And you know, the listeners find that fascinating as well. But I didn't want it to be an interview, and I didn't want it to be, you know, laborious, people getting on there going, oh God, here we go again, because it's just not, you know, it's not fun.
It's going to keep coming back to Cheap Trick, unfortunately, by accident here, but I've never heard him explain Surrender before. I was super shocked that he would choose Surrender and open up about Surrender. Had you pitched a song to him, or
Well, no, it's funny. So I spoke with his manager, and I said to the manager, I said, hey, you know, Rick knows who we are, because he knew that Less Than Jake had covered Surrender. And we had played with Cheap Trick a couple of years ago. And and after that, I went and took my father to go see Cheap Trick, and we hung out backstage. And so Rick's familiar with myself and the band. And I just talked through their manager, Kevin. I said, hey, you know, ask Rick what song he'd like to do. I said, you know, just food for thought, you know, Less Than Jake covered Surrender, and I would really love to dissect that song. And he wrote me back like that day. I was just like, Surrender it is. I was like, that's awesome, because I knew that my listeners would really, really want to hear about that as well.
I didn't realize that song meant anything. I have to say, like you, I've heard it thousands of times. And every now and then there's an amazing songwriter, somebody like Rick Ocasek, who they'll ask about songs and goes, I just made it up. It's all from the perspective of other people. And I find that a lot of my favorite songwriters, they just made it up. It has nothing to do with what they went through. I had no idea that Surrender was in any way a personal song.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't either. There's times when what you just said, I'm shocked that someone will say, yeah, I just wrote this one morning. It's nonsense. Like, what? Yeah. Because it touched people around the globe in a certain way, and it stirred up all these emotions. Whereas other people are like, oh yeah, this was about this specific thing, and this is what it's about. And at the same time, other people didn't get that from the song. They felt it was about them or their divorce or their dad dying or something in their life happening. So that's why music's great, because it's so subjective. And that's why, starting the podcast, going on into my 5th month, almost 6 months now. And when I had first started doing it, so my manager, Chris Fafalios, who's also the producer of the show, Chris we had been working together, and he said, there's something I really want you to do. Consider, I really think you should do a podcast. And people had said that to me for probably the past decade. And I was like, nah. He's like, well, why? I said, everyone does a podcast. It's just, every Tom, Dick, and Harry, you got a bedroom, you got a microphone, you could do a podcast. Right. And he said, yeah, but they're not you. And kind of chewed on that for a little bit. And I kind of knew what he meant. He meant what you said a moment ago, is I have such a great springboard to jump off of. I know so many people. I'm not going to have to try to get my foot in the door. I'm going to have an initial thing. And he also said, it's just going to be great. It's going to be great for other projects. He says, I know you're a natural at this. And he said, I really think people are going to love it. And I went to sleep that night. And the very next morning I got up. Just got done making breakfast for my kids, and I'm just sitting there, and I start checking emails, and then I stopped checking emails, and I went direct to my text, and I texted like 20 guys, just boom. Yeah. I'm starting a podcast. I don't even know the name of the show yet. I'm starting a podcast. Will you be on it? And I got the first week we taped 12 episodes in 1 week. You did all of that in 1 week. Okay. Yeah. I went for it because I knew that I'm kind of an all or nothing guy. I wanted to go for it. I wanted to jump in, and I in the back of my mind, I was like, if no one likes it, and if I'm not more than if no one likes it, if I am not getting something out of this and I don't enjoy it, then I got a couple months of episodes. It's fun, and I can just say, heck with it. And here we are. It's amazing, and I don't use the word amazing much. I make fun of people who use the word amazing, because they're going to say, oh, these pancakes are amazing. Like, no, they're not. They're pancakes. This chair is amazing. Everything is amazing. But I'm going to say it's amazing to me that the podcast is not your only creative outlet. Less Than Jake is not your only creative outlet beyond that. The custom songs that you're doing, that demo reel of custom songs cracked me up, because you're able to change genres mid-sentence. So I hear somebody who's not only putting great work out there, but is actually getting everything done in a prolific way. Have you always been this motivated and prolific, or did it just come in the last couple of years? No, I've always been this way, but with everything, with schoolwork, I always had my projects turned in ahead of time. I can't have something sitting in my head. I have to purge it. That's just the way my brain works. Sure. But the band was always enough for me, and we toured so much. A couple of the other guys, our old drummer had a record label, has a record label, and he started a toy company, and Roger has a side project, side band called Rehasher, and Buddy has a side band, and everyone's kind of had their own things over the years. And I would get off the road after touring for 3 months and just be like, all right, I'm done touring. We're not leaving again for 3 weeks. And it was kind of like, call up my buddies and go out and have some dinner and some drinks. And I would go into relax mode, because I got every bit of creativity out of me with Less Than Jake. And I still do, for the most part. but you know, I have children now, and my son's almost 4. My daughter's going to be 3 next year. She's so I have, you know, have the kids, and I came home last year, and we had finished doing a new Less Than Jake record, and I don't know, I just had one of those. It wasn't a midlife crisis. It was just I felt like the first half of my life was over, you know, that I was starting the second half of my life, because I am middle aged, and it wasn't in a bad thing. It was just who am I outside of Chris from Less Than Jake? Because I was never Chris Demakes. You know, that was the only thing. I don't have any regrets. Regrets are not good, because they do nobody any good.
Right.
But if there is one thing that I wish that I would have changed, was we were too punk for school back in the 90s, and something stuck with us throughout our career is I was Chris from Less Than Jake. We never put our last names in records. In fact, in the 90s, when we do interviews pre-internet, it was always, I was like Chris Van Halen, Chris Lee Roth. I was like, you know, Chris whoever.
Everyone did that. Bowling for Soup, that was Jarrett Von Erich.
Well, you know, it was kind of the thing to do, but nobody knows who I am. Yeah. And I don't mean that in a bad way. It's like nobody knew. In fact, I would put out, I was the last one at the table to do social media stuff with the band. I have had a Facebook page forever, personal one, but the guys in the band were finally like, dude, you need a Twitter, you need Instagram. I'm like, and I was showing my age. I was like, I don't want to deal with that, because I've talked to a lot of guys that are up my age, you know, around my age. They're like, I don't do that social media shit. I don't want to deal with it. And I started to realize the importance of it. And I put this page out there, and, you know, overnight I had like a couple thousand followers, but then it went, you know, and those couple thousand are the fans that are really in tune and know who I am from the band, but nobody knew who Chris Demakes was. So, and I'm not saying this is a bad thing or like a pity party. It's just,
cons, you know,
what's that?
Pros and cons to,
well, absolutely. No, I'm not painting in a bad light. I'm going somewhere with this. I was being long winded, but, last fall, I was thinking, who am I? Who am I outside of this band? You know, what else do I do that I love? And I was kind of banging my head against the wall for like a month or two. I was just thinking, like, what else do I like that I want to do? Well, I enjoy exercising, and I enjoy reading rock biographies. I enjoy time with my family. Okay, yeah, but like job-wise, what else do you like? And I don't know. I just had this epiphany of, you're a musician. Everything's right in front of you. Yeah. You know, it's right there. Just do something outside of the band. And that was it, you know. And once it started, you know, you used the word prolific. I just dove in the last year, and that's why it's, you know, you're not the first person to say it. It's like, whoa, what the heck happened to you? And, you know.
You go from a band that, you know, new album every 2 years, and out of nowhere, an EP every 6 months out of nowhere, that kind of thing. And that's your output, with you co-wrote 15 songs and that's it, to now this guy, Chris, did you say 11 podcasts in the first week?
I think we did about a dozen the first week. It was, it was like 3 months of content, because I do the podcast once a week.
And you got to think about how much more personality there is in a podcast than there is a song. The greatest song of all time still does not say very much about who the person is. Like, what does Mick Mars's speaking voice sound like? You know,
not many people know.
It's kind of tough to think about that some of our favorite people in the world. What does Bunny Carlos talk like? I don't know. I think I could pick out Robin Zander's speaking voice, but then you listen to 2 podcast episodes, even if it's just a 20, 30-minute thing, and you're like, okay, well, I know where the person lives and what they sound like and what makes them tick and what their stutters are and all that. So you just put out like 10 years of musical equivalent in like 3 months. That's how I look at it.
Well, I appreciate it. Yeah, and I never really thought about it like that. I just, you know, to answer your initial question, yeah, I've always been very motivated, but I was always satisfied with the band. And I always kind of had this, I don't know, this, and I still do. I think our best record's in front of us. I think our best show's in front of us. I think once you lose sight of that, then you have no more fight left in you, you know? And that was always enough for me to attain and strive for. And, you know, things just kind of, I don't know, like something clicked with me. I really don't know. I can't explain it. It was just, you know, I'm not really a religious person, but it was some kind of divine thing that just kind of hit me one day. And I was like, you know, I'm feeling unfulfilled. Like, and I wasn't unfulfilled in an unhappy way. I have a beautiful family, band, fans all over the world. I wake up generally happy, you know, every day, most of the time. And, but there was just something inside me that there's something more out there, and just started getting into projects. Chris has been a tremendous help, my manager. He's, him and I get along fantastic. He plays bass in the band Punchline, who used to be on Fuel by Ramen.
That's the same Chris?
That's
I didn't
the same
know
Chris.
that.
Yeah, it's the same Chris.
I saw them open up for Fall Out Boy before they were famous on Long Island. I didn't know that's the same Chris I've been talking with. Wow.
Oh, yeah, that's the same Chris, yeah. So, you know, and Chris, he had done a cartoon animation for, we did a tour with Bowling for Soup last fall, and he did an animation little skit thing where Jarrett was calling Roger and I, and we're like, you know, we were acting like we weren't interested in doing the tour. It was this funny thing Chris put together. Yeah. And I started doing my custom songs, and I thought, you know, it'd be cool to do an animated video to advertise my songs. And I called Chris up and said, hey, would you be interested? Yeah, I would love to. So I hired him to do this video. And it was just, I mean, within a week, it was one thing after another of ideas. And we just, you know, it was kind of like, I even made the joke that it was like our honeymoon phase. I'm like, I feel like we're dating, you know, we were texting, but it was just this excitement, you know, and he felt the same excitement, and he wanted to work, you know, outside of Punchline, wanted to do something creative, and him and I have just been busy, and it's been great.
Yeah. And another compliment, because I just can't stop on the compliment end, and you're going to have to take these compliments, is the conversations that you're having with a lot of these people who are peers or friends are probably the same conversations that you would have had anyway had the recorder not been going on. So it's wonderful that you're documenting your life, because otherwise the phone call would have happened, or you would have had that over drinks and that was it. Hey, that was a good conversation. But now you preserved what you would be doing had you not been paid. Yeah, and now I'm getting into other artists. So I've done a couple of people now that, and I've gotten the best compliments. These two, it was the same compliment from two separate artists. They both said, we got done with the podcast, and I'm like, you know, saying the end things like, you know, thank you so much for being on the show, blah, 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 you know, the closing of the show. And they both said, man, that was really different. That was unlike anything I've ever done. And one of the guys has been in business over 30 years. And he's like, that was unlike anything I've ever done. That was really enjoyable. Thank you. You know, I did one yesterday that was just, the artist at the end was just like, well, first of all, when's this going to air, what we're doing here? You tell me when you want it to air, and it's going to air then. Well, if it airs after October 5th, which isn't very long from now, I can tell you who the artist was yesterday. So I can scrape. You can tell me, and I'll scrape that from this. But odds are it's going to be after October 5th. Perfect. So yeah, if it's after October 5th, I had Laura Jane Grace on yesterday from Against Me. Oh wow, yeah. And Laura, who I've known forever. Yeah. We pretty much just laughed through the whole episode and just had fun. Like you said, it was like two friends backstage talking about a song. But Laura had never been asked the questions I was asking about the song, and was just we did the song White People for Peace off their New Wave record, and just completely floored. Made mention at the end like, man, this was just unlike anything I've ever done. And it's refreshing. And that has been one hard thing, especially right now with bands not being able to tour. Bands are in between projects. So I've been hitting up management companies and stuff and being like, hey, I want to get so-and-so artist. I'm like, yeah, they're not doing any interviews right now. It's like, okay, first of all, this isn't an interview. The last fucking thing I want to do is interview anybody. Last thing. I never want to do another interview. I never want to be interviewed. Okay. And this isn't an interview what we're doing. We're just talking. You know, this is I'm not directing that at you, but the formal interview of like, okay, state your name. Oh Christ. You don't know my name? Yeah.
So how long's Les and Jake been together? It's like, do you have one of these? Like, do you know how to use it? It's like, it's almost insulting, and not from an ego. I'm not like, but it's like, if you're a journalist, do your research. So
sure.
Getting across the point to them that I don't want to do an interview, number one. Number two, with all due respect, I'll let you plug the shit out of your new album at the end of the podcast, but I don't care about the new record, and most of your fans probably don't either. Just like they don't give a fuck about a new Les and Jake record. I hate to be like that, but like people, I always give the example of Metallica's last record had some of their best songs ever, in my opinion. There's one song that spit out the bone that if that was on Master of Puppets, it'd be one of their biggest hits. But that song doesn't have 30 years of memories attached to it.
Mm-hmm. The memory doesn't remain.
There you go. Dum-dum. Yeah. And you can quit your day job because that was really good. You should go into stand-up. Or sit down. You're doing it sit down. It's perfect.
Yeah.
But, that's one of the challenges is getting across. No, this is about a song of theirs that one of their biggest songs that has touched people, and it's not an interview. And again, I don't care about your third drummer who's suing you or this and that, or your bass player who cheated on with your wife. This is about the hit in the song. And once I get that across, I've had people come around and go, oh, okay, I get it.
Yeah. You're creating a community, and you're doing it with like-minded people, and you're focusing on the people that actually matter instead of trying to win over the unattainable people who never read liner notes.
Yeah, well, that and eventually I kept thinking, I'm using my initial circle of friends and world that I come from, punk and ska, to get artists. But now I've been branching out and I'm getting some other folks. So I got some really good guests coming up that are not part of my world at all. That's exciting for me because I don't know them. And I like that aspect of it too, because most of the people I've had on are friends of mine so far. It's very easy to talk to your friends. It's challenging, and I like a challenge. It's a little more challenging when you don't know someone's personality or what you're going to get on the other line.
For sure.
And I have to remain stoic and professional in what I do in that setting,
And that all harkens back to the Rick Nielsen interview, which you handled very well as the straight man, even though he told you he was in the room when you were conceived or your brother was conceived.
My brother was, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, and it was ridiculous. But, and it was those kinds of moments where I'm sitting there and I'm like, man, I'm sitting here in my home studio talking to Rick Nielsen and he's making jokes about my parents fucking, it's like, what the hell's going on?
Is it cool if I now steer towards the Van Halen, David Lee Roth portion of our conversation?
You can steer wherever you want. Let's do it.
Paltrocast.
Thanks for checking out the Paltrocast with Darren Paltrowitz, produced by V13 Media. Theme song by Steve Schiltz. Audio mixing by Mark Piro. Until next time, have a great Shabbos.
Paltrocast.